I began by embarrassing them with a fake sort of 50s mid-Atlantic disc jockey voice saying, "Hi guys and gals, for our next little number, an old-time favorite." And then I pointed out that in the 50s, when I was being brought up, that would be considered very bad taste to take a great work like Beethoven's Pastoral Symphony by the master himself and calling it a little number. Because in those days, there was a big gulf between popular and what's called highbrow culture, which began to erode in the 60s. And now it seems laughable. But I asked the audience if they recognized this piece of music. Here's a clue.
Where am I?
It's the cult
In the village.
TV serial The Prisoner,
What do you want?
which had this
Information.
lovely scene
Whose
in
side are
it.
you on? That would be telling. We want information. 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 You won't get it. By hook or by crook, we will. Who are you? The new number 2. Who is number 1? You are number 6. I am not a number. I am a free man.
What could be more insulting than to be called just a number, not a name? Indeed, this is how we humiliate prisoners. We give them a number. Or soldiers that need to have their egos broken so they can be disciplined. I'm not a number. I'm a free man, the hero of The Prisoner says. Now, for Crowley, even a small number like 6 is not small, it's infinite. Because you see, as a Kabbalist, he could interpret that number 6 in so many ways. He could go to the numerical Kabbalah and look at words which add up to the number 6. He could look at the number 6 as 2 times 3, the hexagram, dividing into an upward pointed triangle and a downward pointing triangle. Deus et daemon inversus. And he could see it in that the alchemical symbols of fire and water. He could also interpret in terms of it being what they call a triangular or perfect number. 1 plus 2 plus 3 equals 6. And the next perfect number is 10. And he could see all that before he's even got on to considering it as the 6th sign of the zodiac, Virgo, or the 6th tarot trump, and so on. You see, for someone like Crowley, back then, 6 is not as big as 7 or 8, and yet it is every bit as big in terms of meaning and significance, because every number is infinite. There's no difference. Now, that was true then, and it's true now. And it actually, you don't have to be a Kabbalist to do that, because that piece of music I played you at the beginning was Beethoven's 6th. And you could imagine someone who was a great musician, a Beethoven enthusiast, being put into solitary confinement with nothing to read and no company, and to pass his time that person might think of the number 6 and think of Beethoven's 6 and be able in his mind to run right the way through the score, picturing every single instrument playing its part and everything, right the way through. And he could even think of different versions of it and how they change slightly and how different they are. All that could unpack from the number 6 for that person. And you might get a fan of the Prisoner TV series, the cult series, hearing someone saying, I am not a number, I am a free man, and saying, hey, are you a fan too? And they could spend their whole evening talking about number 6 and his adventures and their favourite episodes. All that can unpack from one number. And the fact that 6 is bigger than 2 doesn't matter. It's infinite. Now that was true in Crowley's day, and it's true now. But something else has changed. You see, that first piece of music I played you, the Pastoral Symphony, in Crowley's day would have been a continuous groove in a piece of, in a wax cylinder or on a gramophone record. A continuous squiggly groove. Whereas what I played you was actually a number, literally. It was a digitized version. That whole beautiful piece of music is actually just one digital number. It is a number, but it's true it's not a small number, a little number by any chance, because that number is several megabits long. It's actually bigger than the number of molecules in the universe. It's a huge number. It's a number that would never occur by chance in the entire history of the universe. But it is just a number. Now this is interesting because this is a digitization of oral experience. And we also now can digitize visual experience. You can go to a magnificent 3D movie and you can move into a 3D world in high definition and experience that. And yet it too is on a DVD. It is just a number. And we're moving towards being able to digitize all our experience. We can't yet do it for smells and tastes and feelings on the skin, but we're working towards that. And the people who are trying to create virtual realities are trying to find ways to digitize total experience so that you could actually be in a virtual reality and be able to examine it in depth and not miss anything. Now you see, take me. You could take my DNA profile and digitize it. And then you would have all the information necessary to produce a clone of me. And that clone, would it be me? No, it would just be my identical twin, if you like. It wouldn't have my experience. But if we come to the point where we could digitize my entire life experience, every word, every sight, every smell, every taste that I experience from the moment of birth until the moment I die, then that plus my DNA, we would have a complete digital representation of me. I would be a number, but I would be utterly unique. I would be a number that could never occur by chance ever again in the universe. And so that gives new meaning to what it says in the Book of the Law. Every number is infinite. There is no difference. And yet every man and every woman is a star. Now this was back in 2004, and I showed people next a picture of a star of the day. And I asked, this man has a problem. He's unhappy. He doesn't look it. The reason he's unhappy is because he's the second richest man in the world. Larry Ellison at the time was unhappy because his rival Bill Gates was the richest man in the world. Now that sounds funny. I wish I had his problem. But it actually reflects something in our world, because I'm told that silver medalists in the Olympics can be miserable. They can suffer depression because they were number 2, not number 1. You see, apparently, if you get a bronze medal, you're a happy person because, wow, you've got an Olympics in the medal. I mean, so you've got a medal in the Olympics. If you've got a gold medal, obviously you're proud because you're number 1. But if you've got a silver medal, you can worry. You think, if only I just gone that little bit faster, if only I just jumped further, I could have got a gold. We're like that. And I think that there's a reason why we can achieve so much and feel so unhappy. And it relates to a change in the way we experience ourselves nowadays. And I suggested that if you went back to the feudal times, then people then didn't have individuality like they do now. They were cogs in a machine. And I gave the example of, a village swineherd. There is someone with a very humble job, no status, no individuality. The swineherd can't say, "Oh, Dad, I decided I'm going to go to university and be a doctor instead." No, he's stuck being a swineherd in a feudal village. That's very humble. There's no individuality there. But on the other hand, he knows his value. Because without that swineherd, the village couldn't run properly. They didn't have the mobility of labour now that they could just go and get another swineherd. If he wasn't a swineherd, the village would have a real problem. The clock would stop. So he did feel significant. But nowadays, we don't have that feeling of significance. We are more like the drop in the ocean. Now, you see, if you look at that little drop in the centre of that picture, you could peer into it like a crystal ball, and you'd actually see the whole ocean stretching out upside down in that image, like a lens. And you could even take that drop of water to a chemical laboratory and analyze it, and you would know the composition of the whole ocean. But when that drop of water falls into the ocean, it's absolutely nothing. If that drop of water was evaporated by the sun, the ocean just wouldn't notice. Who would care? It's nothing. And I think this is the feeling that haunts us. You see, how do we get over that feeling of nothingness? It's we measure ourselves. And Larry Ellison measures himself against wealth. There he is, somewhere up that line of wealth. And he's way, way ahead of any of us. But he's worried because there's someone further up that line, Bill Gates. Now, other people, it doesn't have to be wealth. I'm told that Marilyn Monroe, who in her day many people considered the most beautiful woman in the world, apparently she was unhappy. She didn't think she was beautiful enough. People say they like my work because it's clever. Well, if I really identified with that, I could feel quite insecure. I mean, what if I find another writer who's cleverer than me? Are they all going to desert me? Ouch. If we identify with any of these points, we're in trouble. There are all the different ways we can classify ourselves. Cleverness, beauty, wealth, whatever. Humour. And we can worry that there might be someone cleverer than us. And it's worse than that, because we might be the wealthiest person in the world and we could still worry. Why is that? It's because each of these lines is actually continuous and infinite. At the end of every one of these lines, there is a God. However, the cleverest person in the world knows that at the end of that line, the gods of cleverness, there's Mercury, Hermes, Thoth, infinitely clever. At the end of wealth, there's Midas, Pluto, Hades, gods of infinite wealth. And then the gods of infinite beauty, Aphrodite, Venus. We can compare ourselves with these infinities and feel that we are nothing. We can feel miserable, however great we are. And yet in the book of the law it says these are fools that men adore. These stars that we put up on a pedestal. Both their gods and their men are fools. Now you see, what has changed since then is, if I think of myself as that number, if I think of myself as a number, it isn't necessarily such an insult, because it is a number which is absolutely unique. It'll never occur again. You see, I said to the audience, now, wouldn't it be amazing if I could bring the richest man in the world onto the stage? Bill Gates, here he is, applause. Businessmen would pay £500 a ticket to be in the hall when that happens, and to listen to Bill Gates. If the most beautiful woman in the world came on stage now, you would remember that and tell people about it the day you were in the room with the most beautiful woman in the world for the rest of your life. And I said to them, that is nothing. I can give you something far, far more. You can tell your grandchildren, your children, and generations to come, that on this day, which was April the 10th, 2004, you were in the presence of the most Ramsey Jukes man in the universe. The most Ramsey Jukes man that there ever has been in the universe. The most Ramsey Jukes man that there ever will be in the entire history of the universe. You will never see him again. I am a star. I am unique. I am infinite. And the same is true for each of you. And thus it is when the Book of the Law says every man and every woman is a star, every number is infinite, there is no difference. It now has even more meaning than it ever did in the past. And I suggested that that is actually a very positive message. And it is something which we can look at with new eyes, because we are now living in a digital Aeon where experience can be digitized and presented. Everything is a number. I then moved on to a problem that arises from that. It is that feeling that we're absolutely bombarded by numbers, by information assault. That feeling, there are just too many emails, too many bits of junk mail coming in, too many phone calls, messages, social media, and so on and so forth. Now, back then, in 2004, my image of information assault was someone like this. Here's a city trader. He has 6 screens like that, continually updating in front of his eyes. Notice that he has a headset on so he can simultaneously take voice messages from the phone. He probably has several keyboards in front of him, and his day may have begun at 7 o'clock in the morning, reading the Financial Times and other papers in great detail, and he'll work all through the day in front of those screens and probably just bite sandwiches for lunchtime and work on until 10 o'clock that evening, and some people would even sleep under their desks in order to be back at work the next day. Isn't that just a picture of information overload? And yet the Book of the Law is exhorting us for more. Exceed, exceed. If you drink, drink by the 8 and 90 rules of art. If you love, exceed by delicacy. Let there be subtlety therein. It seems to be inviting us to take more and more. Now I then showed them a picture very different from that man's screens. This is where I was brought up as a child, in the deep country, an old watermill. Now behind that house, if you went up onto the hillside and looked down the valley, this is what you would see. A rich natural landscape. Take one tiny part of it, that boulder at the end of the wall, the dry stone wall. It is hugely complex in terms of information. It is fractal in its complexity, the surface of that stone. It's got lichens on it. It's got a smell to it. It's got a way to feel, a touch. It's a hugely complex object. Far more complex than any of those screens that person is looking at. And yet it's just one tiny part of the world I grew up in. I couldn't find a picture of myself as a child, only a rather distorted picture of a teenager standing in water in deep nature. And I said that that person is getting far more information hurled at him than the person with the screens. Why did I say that was so? So let's look at what he's getting. Those screens are downloading data from the internet along a narrow broadband channel. You could probably collect all the data on those screens for the entire day and all the changes and put them all onto a DVD and still have room for the digitization of the newspaper he read, all the voice messages that come in and everything. That bombardment of data is actually nothing very much. It's tiny. When you compare it with this woman walking through water on a beach, in a complex fractal landscape of palm trees, feeling the water around her feet, in a world that is complicated, full of sounds and smells and things, there's far more data hitting her every second that man gets through his day. Now you might say the man also has got skin, there is air around him, but he's wearing clothes. He doesn't notice his environment because it's familiar and unchanging. All he notices is what's on those screens and the voices coming to him. Whereas that woman, well, is she in a daydream? No, because when you're walking naked in nature, the slightest touch on your shoulder might be a mosquito. You have to be alert and aware. Her bare feet might be treading on a sea urchin. She has to be aware of everything that is happening around. It's a vivid experience. It is a flood of data that she's receiving. And I think that is why that man at his screens, when he does have time off, typically would go in for extreme sports like rock climbing, paragliding, because actually his body is hungry for data. He wants more information. He wants real sensations flooding his being. So when the Book of the Law says, exceed, refine thy rapture, it's actually exhorting us to take in more information, not less. But that does present us with a bit of a problem, because if that is so, why is it that that woman walking on the beach actually feels refreshed and invigorated by her experience, whereas the man sitting at his desk getting so little data coming to him feels exhausted at the end of the day? And I suggested that the answer is to do with data compression and decompression. Now this was back in 2004, and there had been a comet hitting Jupiter. Big news in the world of astronomy. And pictures of this impact came up on the internet. And I was able to download a picture, an image from the internet at a miserable 36 kilobits per second on a modem. Out of that decompressed signal came this beautiful two-dimensional image, color image. Now that's only the beginning of the decompression, because in my mind, looking at that two-dimensional image, I can make it into a three-dimensional surface of the planet Jupiter. And I can actually look at that black splodge and say, that must be where the comet hit. And I'm sure that sort of grey C-shaped area, crescent-shaped area, must be the sort of the splash pattern from it. I can get a lot more information than just a two-dimensional disk from that by unpacking it. And an astronomer, an experienced astronomer who knew a lot about Jupiter could get a hell of a lot more, because that's the way science works. They would look at that, they would take measurements, and they would be able to tell you things about the surface of Jupiter that we never knew before, all from that one picture. It's an amazing decompression of a tiny bit of information. Now that's a wonderful thing that we can do that. But it also, I think, causes problems. And to illustrate that, I said, imagine I'm walking home from work one day and I see one of those, these newspaper hoardings which tell you the late news headlines. And I see this. And I begin to feel angry. Oh, these bloody Tory councillors. You know what they're like. Blustering old farts. Probably with blazers and monocles and side whiskers going, whoa, youth nowadays isn't what it was, all these punks and everything. Probably one of them has had a scratch on his Rolls Royce or something. All right, we've got to crack down on youth crime. I get home really angry thinking of these people. I've unpacked all that from those 7 words. Now, if I was given more information, for instance, if I was just given pictures of the Tory council, I might notice that actually they're not all that old. None of them's wearing a monocle. And in fact, one of them's a woman. So I was quite wrong. I'd unpacked a lot that wasn't there when I get more information. And if I was given even more information still, if I actually heard the entire meeting conversation, I might find that actually they're decent people really trying to do better for the environment and for the community we live in. And that is part of the trouble nowadays when we're given tiny little bits of information, sound bites, tweets, things like that. We have to unpack so much from them that it's exhausting us. You see that man at his desk, he sees one digit changing. The cost of the yen in Japan is moving, it's going down. And he sees another change, perhaps in China or in America. And from those 3 tiny bits of information, he works out something that must be happening in the world. Ah yes, the market's getting nervous about whatever, some political situation. He unpacks all that and he makes decisions. That is hard work. And also, it means that it causes a huge amount of stress. In South Africa at present, there's a lot of concern about racism. And the word monkey has got racist connotations. And someone put out some tweets or something which used the word monkey, and it caused a furor. People said it was a racist observation. And it made the headlines in the newspapers. It made television news at night. Huge amount of anger was stirred up because not enough information was given about what the person meant in that tweet. And yet the book of the law says, be strong, bear more joy. If you drink, drink by the 1890 rules of art. It's inviting us not to take these little sips at reality, but to gulp, to really take in more. Now, in the book I wrote called How to See Fairies, I begin by suggesting that we need to take in more. We need to refine our senses to take in subtle clues that we used to ignore and say were unimportant. And I gave an exercise, a walking exercise, which one reviewer said is the finest mindfulness exercise they've ever come across. People call it mindfulness, this thing about being more open to the moment, taking in more of your senses, rather than just taking in tiny bits of data and unpacking a vast amount from them. I think this is being advocated in the Book of the Law. And going back to that feeling of where we compare ourselves against all these different lines, these continua that go off to infinity with a God at the end of every one. The Book of Law says, O Nuit, continuous one of heaven, let it be ever thus that men speak not of thee as one, but as none, 0 and 1, the digitisation of reality. And let them not speak of thee at all, since thou art continuous. So Nuit was continuous, and yet none breathe the light, faint and fairy of the stars, and two, the binary division. For I am divided for love's sake, for the chance of union. This is the creation of the world, that the pain of division is as nothing, and the joy of dissolution all. To me, 100 years later, looking back, in terms of the Aeon, the digital Aeon we're living in, I can read more into that than I could if I don't take that into account. And I suggest that if, instead of seeing ourselves as points along continuous lines that reach out to infinity and make us feel like nothing, if instead of those continuous lines we think of them as sets of numbers, each one unique, there is my cleverness, not as clever as people out there, not as clever, more clever than people there. And I say, well, actually what people like is not so much my cleverness as the amount of cleverness, the precise level of cleverness, the precise level of humour that I have. And so we can see ourselves more as a unique pattern that will never be repeated. We can see ourselves as stars, unique, unrepeatable. Each one of us is a star, and we are all in the starry body of Nuit. And that to me is what I read into those passages in the Book of the Law.